On this day in history, March 4th, 1791, Vermont is admitted to the United States as the 14th state. Included in the following is an excerpt from the 1944 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, going over the history of the state. The first white man to visit the region now known as Vermont, so far as the records show, was Samuel Champlain, father of New France. Joining an Algonquin war party on the foray into the Iroquois country, July 4th, 1609, he entered the lake which he named Lake Champlain. For well nigh a century and a half, the Champlain Valley was French territory. The increase of the Iroquois compelled the French in Canada to erect a chain of forts to command the approach by way of Lake Champlain and its outlet, the Richelieu River, the great trunk line highway from the valley of St. Lawrence River to southern New England and the Hudson Valley. As the English settlements in Massachusetts and adjacent colonies grew stronger, the Indians gradually withdrew into Canada, and, sullen and revengeful, were ready to join the French in raids upon the English settlements. The first permanent English settlement was a blockhouse erected in 1724 in the town of Brattleboro, and known as Fort Dummer. Later in the same year, a group of Dutch squatters settled in the town of Pownal, in the southwestern corner of Vermont. But not until the British captured Canada in 1760 did the tide of emigration flow into the state. Benning Wentworth, royal governor of New Hampshire, assuming that the rather vague limits of his province, like those of Connecticut and Massachusetts, extended westward to a line 20 miles east of the Hudson River, proceeded to make grants of land between the Connecticut River and Lake Champlain. From 1749 to 1764, he granted 131 townships, and the region was commonly known as the New Hampshire Grants. Lieutenant Governor Golden of New York challenged the right of the New Hampshire executive to grant these lands. For 14 years, the ownership of the disputed region was debated, and on July 20th, 1764, an order of the king and council gave a decision in favor of New York. Thereupon, the New York governors proceeded to grant lands in what is now known as the state of Vermont. Following the close of the French and Indian War and prior to the outbreak of the American Revolution, several thousand persons, largely from Connecticut and Massachusetts, had purchased lands in the New Hampshire grants, had cleared farms, built houses, and planted crops. In 1770, a test case was brought in the New York courts in an ejectment suit concerning property in the town of Shaftesbury, and the court refused to consider the New Hampshire charter as evidence. Ethan Allen, in charge of the defense, returned to Bennington, where the town voted to protect its rights by force if necessary. A military organization was formed, which came to be known as the Green Mountain Boys, Ethan Allen being its commander. In eastern Vermont, New York authority was recognized, and no attempt was made to dispossess settlers. But in western Vermont, New York authority was successfully defied. New Hampshire titles were defended. With the Revolution, the Green Mountain Boys, commanded by Ethan Allen, with some aid from Connecticut and Massachusetts on May 10, 1775, captured the fortress of Ticonderoga on Lake Champlain. The capture was the first aggressive act on the part of the Americans in the Revolutionary War. Vermonters participated in the invasion of Canada in the autumn of 1775, and Ethan Allen was captured by the British in an unsuccessful attempt to take Montreal. A rudimentary form of government was maintained through the Committees of Safety. Conventions were held in 1776 looking toward statehood, Ira Allen being active in behalf of a separate government. On January 16, 1777, a Declaration of Independence was adopted and the name New Connecticut was given the new state. The name was soon abandoned, as it had been used elsewhere, and the name Vermont was substituted. In July 1777, a state constitution was drafted in a convention held at Windsor. This was the first convention adopted by an American state to forbid slavery and to establish manhood suffrage. The new state government was set up in March 1778 with Thomas Chittenden as governor. The British, under General Burgoyne, captured the Lake Champlain forts in July 1777. And the rear guard of the American army, retreating from Ticonderoga, was defeated at Hubbardton, Vermont, July 7, 1777. In an attempt to capture American stores at Bennington, British detachments under Colonel Baum and Breyman were defeated by an American force consisting of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts troops, commanded by General John Stark, on August 16, 1777. This was the beginning of Burgoyne's reverses, which ended in his surrender to General Gates. The new state of Vermont continued to function, although opposed by foes at home and abroad. In 1790, New York, under the leadership of Alexander Hamilton, recognized the independence of Vermont conditioned upon the payment of $30,000, and on March 4, 1791, the Green Mountain Commonwealth was the first state admitted to the Union after the original 13. Settlement was rapid during the latter years of the Revolutionary War. A rough consensus showed about 7,000 people in the state in 1771. In 1791, the number rose to 85,525. After her declaration of independence, the state granted her own lands. In 1779, the legislature planned that they were to be in townships 6 miles square, with 70 rights or divisions in each. 5 divisions in each were reserved: 1 for the support of a college, 1 for a county grammar school, 1 for an English school, 1 for the support of preaching, and 1 for the first settled minister. The legislature convened in several of the larger towns of the state until 1808, when the capital was permanently situated at Montpelier. Many little iron mines were opened, and small forges put in operation with charcoal as fuel. This was an industry which is no longer found. The iron and other businesses were stimulated by the War of 1812. In this war, Vermont troops took part in the battles of Chippewa, Lundy's Lane, Lake Erie, and Plattsburgh. But the only engagement in the state itself was the defense of Fort Cassin at the mouth of the Otter Creek in 1813. Steady expansion followed. Farm produce and cattle were sold south to older markets. The lumber business began to be developed in the Connecticut Valley and along the shores of Lake Champlain, where water transportation was available. The demand at first being principally for ship timber. During the winter, the lines of sledges took the produce of the Champlain region to Montreal, just as that from the southwestern part was taken to Albany, and that from the Connecticut Valley to Portsmouth of Boston. The opening of the Champlain Canal in 1823, connecting Lake Champlain and the Hudson River, largely increased commerce with New York and diverted trade from Canada. Stage lines began to carry the mail and passengers throughout the state. Many towns to which they went had a larger population in 1820 than in 1920. The decade between 1820 and 1830 was the last one in which there was a marked increase of population in the state. After that, many Vermonters were seized with a desire to go west, and so they helped to build many of the northern states of the Mississippi Valley. Many also went south to the rising industrial centers of Massachusetts and Connecticut. Despite these great losses, the population continued to increase, aided in later years by an influx population of French Canadians from Canada. During the Civil War, a small band of Confederates crossed the frontier from Canada and raided the town of St. Albans. In 1870, St. Albans was the headquarters of an attempted Fenian invasion of Canada. Sheep raising was an important farm industry before and after the Civil War, but after 1880 declined rapidly because of competition from the western states and Australia. The Vermont Central, between Windsor and Burlington, and the Rutland from Bellows Falls to Burlington were completed in 1849. In presidential campaigns, the state was Federalist from 1792 to 1800, Democratic Republican 1804 to 20, Adams Republican 1824 to 28, Anti-Masonic 1832, Whig 1836 to 52, and Republican since 1856.